moving over to Mick Douglas, who had an amazing Twitter campaign that he was starting to talk about, and it was brought up to specifically focus on what can organizations do today tactically if they're looking at shoring up their defenses. Mick is one of our foremost experts in working in blue team operations and defensive posturing, and one of our lead course authors and instructors on this topic. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Mick. Mick, take it away. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rob. So next slide, please. So what we're going to be talking about is how to build a defensible and practical approach to defending against advanced persistent threats. Now, as one thing that I want to call back to something that was said earlier in this presentation is about how threat actors actually work. I've said this joke before many times, and I've stolen it from somebody. I'm sorry. But the A in APT actually stands for adequate. What most adversaries are going to be doing is they're going to be doing just enough to get in, and that's it. So what we're going to be doing is talking about how to build real-world practical defenses against state-sponsored attacks. Now, a couple things to unpack here. We've already given you a couple resources on how to do very fast, rapid patching. I want to give another shout out yet again to a good friend of mine, John Gorenflo, who's another instructor for SANS. We put together a PDF that is available in the SANS Resource Center on how to rapidly increase your defensive posture. This section is going to be for those of you who are struggling with what we've given as advice. And we've noticed from the feedback that we've received that a lot of organizations are struggling with changing their posture. And a lot of times it's because they don't know what to do, or they feel that they simply can't move forward because a lot of the things that they want to do are not viable for a variety of options. And so what we're going to explore here is how to leverage some recent developments in the cybersecurity community, and something that should give you a lot of hope. Could you go to the next slide, please? So a little bit ago, you were exposed to the Mitre attack framework, and what you were shown is that the color on these different attack techniques indicate how much a particular threat actor group is leveraging them. Now, there's a lot to love about the Mitre attack framework, and I want to be clear, I'm an open fan of it. The thing that's beautiful about it is that now we as cybersecurity professionals, both offense and defense, can talk about how attackers do what they do in a way that's agnostic. I've been doing computer security research for, 20 years now. And, when you moved from one vendor to the other, it was very difficult having these conversations. You would say like, oh, well, it's, they're doing the blue lollipop attack, just made something up, right? So now we have these terms that are very discrete and finite. Well, what we can do is leverage this and actually build a tailored defensive posture for them. Next slide, please. Now, lesser known from Mitre is a project called Defend. And Defend is a matrix of countermeasures that can align with the attack framework. And what I'm going to be doing is sharing with you a way that you can take information from the Mitre attack framework and marry that up to the Defend framework and make a better, more informed choice on how you're going to go about protecting your organization. So next slide, please. So what we're going to do is, this is a little bit of a roadmap of what we're going to be choosing here. So step one, we're going to choose an attacker group. Now, because this is about the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian war, we're going to pick a Russian attack group. Then what I'm going to do is walk you through how to build up what is called a balanced scorecard so that you can determine what the threats and what the appropriate defenses are for them. And then you, as the organization, will have your own tailored and customized approach. So next slide, please. All right. So one item, and Rob, thank you very much for the kind intro. He shared with you that I'm one of the defensive teachers. I also teach on the offensive curriculum with SANS too. So I have a very unique stance when it comes to cybersecurity. I have a deep appreciation and understanding for how attackers and attacker groups work because I am one. And one of the things that is interesting is that certain attackers have a style, if you will. And you may have heard the term TTPs, the tools, techniques, and procedures. These are the things that a group or an individual does that's kind of like a fingerprint or a calling card. Well, what we can do as cybersecurity professionals, especially those who practice cyber threat intelligence, we can observe different attacks that take place over time and notice that there's certain similarities and group those into a particular threat actor group. So next slide, please. And what you can do, and this is a function that's already built into the Mitre attack framework and one that, in my opinion, isn't used nearly enough. What you can do is click into the groups section of the attack framework and see what your different adversaries are. And in this case, I just randomly selected a group called Nomadic Octopus. And here, according to the Mitre attack system, are the different things that are pretty much like their quote unquote calling card. These are the things that you would expect to do if you're under the attack of the Nomadic Octopus group. Now, unfortunately, not many people, one, know about this capability within the attack framework, but for even those who do, I'm seeing them not leverage it to its fullest extent. And so what I'm going to do is walk you through a process that you can use to make some very meaningful and interesting changes to your cybersecurity posture based off of this information. So next slide, please. All right, what we've got here is the scorecard being created. Over on the left, you see the known attack techniques for the Nomadic Octopus group that are directly from the Mitre attack site. And literally all I did was I copied and pasted this into Excel, which, by the way, it sounds like I'm being a bit snarky, but any cybersecurity professional who's got any kind of seat time knows that Excel is really the analysis tool of choice for a lot of this type of work. Then what we do is we take the Mitre defend techniques, and those basically are just the headings and then the core groups, and put them across the top. Now, what we're going to do is start filling in a matrix and using this to determine how you can best counteract, how you can best prevent, how you can best detect, and also potentially even remediate. So remember, a control isn't necessarily just prevent. A control can be, and a viable option is detection or remediation as well. So next slide, please. So when you're using the defend framework in this way, what you will do is go to the defend site on it's defend.mitre.org, and what you can do is in the upper left corner, there's this little text entry point. Now you can type out the full description of the particular attack, or you can do what I do and just start typing in the particular attack technique. And as you type it in, it'll start auto-selecting from the database and pulling up the info. So I'm seeing some comments or questions about Defend. Yes, it is new. It was officially released publicly, I believe, June of last year, and it is much lesser known, and it's awesome. You guys are gonna just fall in love with it in just a moment. So next slide, because this is where Defend becomes awesome. When you type in the full attack, the Mitre attack technique, what will happen is you get this overlay appear in the web browser. And you'll see there, right there in the center where it says PowerShell execution, that's the actual attack technique that's being leveraged. On the left, all of those blue elements are the parts of the Mitre Defend framework and how they interrelate to that particular attack framework. So now what you have is an incredibly nuanced view of how attacks actually work. Now, one thing, and this bit is super, super critical. If you take nothing away from my section, I want you to understand something. Look at how many defend elements there are against that particular attack technique. All too often, as cybersecurity professionals, and I am absolutely guilty of this, I want to be cards completely face up. I fall into this trap very often. I start thinking, oh, here's this attack. I need to do a particular defense. That's never, ever how it is. You always have multiple paths of defense. So what we're going to do now is account for all of these and put them into our matrix. So next slide, please. What I do is I simply count out the number of controls that fall into a particular grouping. So I realize that this is way too zoomed out for you to see, and that's actually kind of deliberately by design. I don't want you to get too focused on a particular technique. What I want you to realize is that it's not too difficult. What we're doing is we simply say, oh, we have one particular control that applies to this grouping. We have a couple controls that apply to this grouping, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the coloring that's happening in this Excel sheet is I've done a gradient color in that particular, in this grid. And the reason that I personally like to do these color gradients is that they make it visually pop on which items are going to be your best chances of either preventing, detecting, or correcting a particular attack. Now, I see somebody asked, can you share the matrix? Yeah, I'll post the matrix online. It's simply an Excel sheet. It's nothing really fancy. I'll actually be talking a little bit about how you can build your own, but if it's helpful for you, yeah, I'd be happy to send it. So, at this point, I want to pause and state something that hopefully is a little obvious at this point. This is not difficult to do, to build up these sorts of matrices, okay? I do want to warn you, though, it is a touch tedious. It's not technically difficult. I mean, what you're just literally doing is you're going to that defend site, you type in the technique, you group them based off of their raw count, and you get this. This is one particular technique. Next slide. You just do it over and over again until you have filled out all the particular techniques. And once you're done, you simply have this balanced scorecard of here's a particular attack technique, and now here's my defensive options that are most appropriate for it. And this is where you can start having some really nuanced and really, really powerful and compelling conversations with leadership, your peers, your clients, everybody that you're going to be having conversations with. Next slide. Because what should be apparent once you do this sort of thing is that you will see that certain control groups are incredibly effective. And what's weird is that a lot of the conventional wisdom that we have been telling folks for decades now in the cybersecurity community doesn't really hold up as well as we might think or hope. There's a lot that you can do with this particular resource at this point. Here's some that are incredibly powerful. One, and most important to this particular topic at hand, if you see that a particular control is doing fairly well and you don't have that control, or that control is relatively immature at your organization, that's the sign that you need to start increasing your posture in that area. Likewise, if you're doing fairly well in a control and it's shown to be quite effective, that might be an area of quick wins where you can go in, zero in, really dial it down and make it so that you're getting a good return on your security efforts. The other one, and this is a little bit outside the scope of this webinar, but is an incredibly powerful reason that you want to do this, is I love doing this type of analysis and using it almost against the vendors, as it were. So let's say I do this analysis against a couple different threat groups, and I notice that my antivirus is not scoring terribly well against the attackers that I'm concerned about. What I can do then is, and I'll remove all the other controls and just send just the antivirus vendor saying, hey, antivirus vendor, here's how you're mapping up against these particular attack sets. And I notice that you're at, and this is completely arbitrary, like you're at about a 5%. You're only catching 5% of the issues. Why is it that we're spending 10% of our information security spend on you? And all of a sudden, the vendor realizes that they're not giving the value that you need. And you can now negotiate your license renewals from a position of power that's also very evidence-based. So go ahead, next slide, please. All right, now I want to talk about some limitations though, okay? There's a lot of, this isn't perfect, okay? So first of all, attacker groups can and do change their techniques. So you need to realize that this isn't like something that should be done once and left alone. Ideally, you have a decent source of cyber threat intelligence. If you don't have a good source of cyber threat intelligence, please consider joining an ISAC. There was a mention of those earlier. Those are information sharing groups. The other thing that you could consider doing is start monitoring the SANS Internet Storm Center. It's a free resource. Internet Storm Center. So isc.sans.edu. Every day there's a new posting on what attackers are doing. This is a great way that you can keep your threat grid or your balanced scorecard or whatever you want to call this, that you can keep this fresh and up to date. Another element, and the second bullet point is one that's very important to understand, is that even though you may score fairly well of saying, here's how the attacker groups are doing and here's our coverages, I want you to understand that you might have perfect coverage, but you still could be, well, regardless of your coverage amount, you will still be attacked. One, okay, that's first and foremost. But secondly, just because you have a control doesn't necessarily mean that it's functioning the way you believe it to be functioning. It's very important that you get penetration testing or some form of QA against your adversaries. So the Internet Storm Center site is isc.sans.edu. Internet Storm Center. The main reason, though, that I would encourage you to start looking at doing this sort of work is that it shows you doing your homework. A lot of organizations are now in a very odd state where they're doing things based off of conventional wisdom. And sometimes the conventional wisdom isn't always wise. You know, I want to be clear, if you have a regulatory or contractual reason to do a particular security control, by all means do it. Please, please. I'm not advocating that you go away from that. But what I am advocating for is if you're the type of an organization, that is worried about an advanced attacker coming against you, you need to have a more tailored defense. And the reasons why you have to worry about this is that attackers have their own labs. And I can say this with great authority because I run, when I'm not teaching for SANS or doing these sorts of webinars, I run a consultancy. And we have a lab where we can emulate small industrial control systems. Our lab allows us to emulate like a 50-person office with multiple domain controllers, multiple servers. So if I, as a small organization, can do that, what would a nation state backer be able to do? So a lot of the defenses that we've been telling people to do, you should already assume that the attackers have them and know how to bypass them already. So by building a more tailored defense against what the attackers are actually doing, these are incredibly powerful and really helpful. Could you actually go back a slide? I do want to point one other thing out that I forgot. So there are some things that you can do to cut, and thank you for backing up. There are a couple things that you can tailor this and customize this to make it even more meaningful for your organization. Some of my clients, some of my friends, what they'll do is instead of using the Mitre attack as the rows, what they will do is they'll take penetration testing findings or vulnerability scan findings and match that against the defend framework. Or maybe you don't want to use the defend framework. Maybe you want to use something else, and that's perfectly all right. One that I really quite like is the Australian Signals Directorate. There's a resource that they've helped create called the Australian Cybersecurity Center's Defenses Against Malware and Attacks. And they have a list of here's the sorts of controls that you should have. That also is a great resource that you can use to build out your columns, your defenses. And if you really want to make it customized and tailored, why don't you just put, here's all of our defensive controls, and then you can see how things go. So just use what makes sense for you. This isn't, some sacred text. The idea is I want you to build a matrix of here's a particular threat, a technical threat that we're worried about, and here's how our defenses will line up against it. What you're looking for, what you're hoping, is that you have multiple layers of defense that can catch a particular thing. Could you advance 2 slides since I had to go back a bit? Now, some people are looking at this and saying, wow, that sounds like a lot of work. And if it is for you, like it is. And what I would encourage you to do is go to the SANS Resource Center. We have the talk that I mentioned about from John Gorenflo and I is online. That QR code is a link to the YouTube chat that we had about 2 weeks ago now. And we walk you through, here's some things that you can do immediately. Now, if you are in a situation where you need to move very, very fast, this is what you need to do. Of course, that analysis stuff, that should take you like a little bit of time, but it's not meant to be a multi-week project. Those sorts of grids that I walked you through, if that takes you more than a day to go through that, you're going too slow. It just shouldn't be that time consuming and onerous. I would much rather that you're spending your efforts instead on shoring up the actual defenses. So next slide, please. Now, one thing that I want to get back to is that I said adequate persistent threat. If you look at the techniques that the Nomadic Octopus group is known for, they use spear phishing. Like that is pretty much their calling card. And what's weird is a lot of defenders will kind of poo-poo phishing and say like, oh, that's whatever. That's how attackers just do it and dumb user clicks the link. Well, no. No, we need to push back on that narrative because Nomadic Octopus is a well-funded group. I would be shocked if they didn't have the security controls that you likely have. They have, the enterprise grade mail filtering tools. They have the enterprise grade web gateways. They have exactly what you have, and so they know what they need to do to fall below that clipping threshold. The other thing is these attacker groups do an amazing job of building ruses. Don't think that you're going to be able to train users out of clicking links. As part of our job functions, we have to click links, we have to open attachments. And attackers, especially advanced attackers, have nothing but time, money, and lots of motivation to come up with ruses that are good enough to get people to click. And Steve Anson, a good buddy of mine and another SANS instructor, says what these groups are doing is they're weaponizing the clicky finger of doom, the most dangerous thing in cyberspace. So understand that these things work, but next slide. When they work, things become fundamentally different. Instead of the attack just being a normal ransomware, the attack is a launching point into your environment. And what's a little odd and troubling for me, at least, is that many people confuse a lower tech, phishing attack for a lower skilled group. They use it because it works, but once they're in, they're able to start doing some massive damage. So next slide, please. So let's start flipping the attackers' playbooks against them and find out what you should be looking for. Here on the slide, I've given you a couple good things to start looking for. Workstation to workstation traffic is really bizarre. Hopefully you've got microsegmentation, or maybe you're even a zero trust network policy. But if you're not, just start looking to see, why is one workstation interacting with another workstation? That just never should be happening. The other one is, I'm going to skip the unexpected and long network flows. That one I hope is self-evident. But the third one, why is Bob's machine in accounting interacting with the R&D server? This is a very common occurrence that I see when I'm doing incident response. I routinely see organizations where they say, well, Bob's machine wasn't allowed to log in, therefore we won. Why was Bob's machine even attempting to log into the R&D server, right? Like, that's a very weird thing. So start looking for those sorts of indicators. Most organizations are announcing that they've been breached internally. You just have to listen to the logs. Next slide. So at the host layer, there's a lot of opportunities to detect. And if you have tools like EDR, or maybe you don't have any EDR, I would encourage you to get a tool like Sysmon from Microsoft System Terminals. And you can start looking for things like a machine that's interacting with too many machines, unexpected executables. I hate to say it, but workstation use is actually pretty boring. It's fairly repetitive, and you should be able to detect unexpected executables. If you can't, please let us know, and we're going to start giving you all kinds of resources on how to start detecting unexpected executables. Also, the bottom two are some of the most important when it comes to detecting early phases of an attack. Once an adversary is in your network, what they will do is they will steal passwords, crack passwords, and reuse the passwords over and over again. So start looking for lateral movement over SMB, which is most easily detected by network-based logins, which is not all that common. You should be seeing this against your file share servers, and that's about it. Once you remove the file share servers, your exception list will fit on a single sheet of paper, even if you're a very, very large org. Also, start looking for too many account login failures from a host. Most organizations are keyed in on detecting failed login by user ID, and you should flip that, look for a particular host. Next slide. So that should be enough to get you started. Do reach out. Let us know what we can do to help you. and arm you to the teeth so that you can be a crunchy and hard to attack organization for the adversaries. Thank you all.